Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, it's New Year. It's a new year. Happy New Year, everybody. Well, the big stories of 2010. We're going to go back to the past. Is that right? And we're off into the future. Pennsylvania politics, in depth and in detail. And guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, welcome back. Well, it wouldn't be a new year if we didn't have this panel, this wonderful panel that we get on of experts covering a whole variety of fields. Little inside politics going on in government. Sitting right over here on my right is Fred Anton. He's the CEO of Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. And across the table from me, Barr. The chamber guy, I can't call him that. He's the VP of Government Affairs at Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. And Jim Redmond, he's a senior VP of the Hospital and Healthsystem Association. Can we get rid of these long titles, Fred? What do you think? Just Fred Anton. How's that?
That's all right with me,
that
Terry.
Works. All right, Fred, you get it first. What's your big story of 2010 in Pennsylvania?
The departure of Arlen Specter and Ed Rendell from the political scene in Pennsylvania.
Huge. Barr.
I would say just the overall the elections, the fact that Pennsylvania now has a Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate, makes huge impact as we move forward.
Yep. Jim Redmond.
I'd say the state's fiscal situation and the budget issues.
Whoa, okay. We got a lot to chew on. All right, Fred. The impact of Ed Rendell and Arlen Specter.
Two tremendously gifted politicians. Senator Specter having held a United States Senate seat for 30 consecutive years. Ed Rendell, over the last 20 years, having been mayor of Philadelphia and governor of Pennsylvania. And they are two very large personalities. Yes. They have accomplished many of the things they set out to do, whether you agree with them or not.
That's true.
And they will be missed by me. And they will be missed by those who have had good relationships.
Barr, it's not arguable that they're huge personalities in the history of this state.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, you have certainly Senator Specter was around for so many years. Ed Rendell, mayor of Philadelphia, two-term governor of Pennsylvania. Absolutely.
Now, Jim Redmond, there's a sea change going on, and we're going to get to the future in a minute. But look, you followed Ed Rendell's career, 8 years as governor, obviously health care, lots of activity under health care. A couple of things that you think Ed Rendell did that strike you as unusually important, besides the spending, health care, the expansion of health care programs.
Well, 4 years ago, he launched his Prescription for Pennsylvania, an effort to cover all Pennsylvanians, reduce the number of uninsured individuals, make a number of changes. Not a lot on that agenda was accomplished. Some of the things on that agenda that were accomplished were efforts to reduce and prevent healthcare-associated infections, prevent payment for events that might occur in a healthcare facility, but expanding the number of people insured was really preempted by the president.
Let's talk about Ed Rendell for a minute. You know him, of course, as mayor of Philadelphia. He comes in here. One of the criticisms, and you know, lots of positives and negatives. $8 billion in spending on all sorts of economic and community development. You're a business guy, Gene. You know, a business guy. Good or bad on balance for the state?
Well, I think it's not good because too much money was spent. But from Ed Rendell's point of view and his philosophy, he got his programs through with the Republicans for a part of his administration in control of both terms of legislation. But Arlen Specter, on the other hand, arguably the Supreme Court today has the composition it does because of Arlen Specter. 3 of those justices, Arlen Specter is directly responsible for their being on the court.
That's a great point.
Contrary to what Arlen Specter might feel about what the court should do, those 3 justices that he'd enabled to get on the court are arguably the 3 most conservative justices.
That's true. For all the criticisms of him being too liberal, right?
Yeah.
All right, Gene, let's talk. We had a huge election, a sea change. Review that sea change for a minute. From where we were before 2010 to where we are, where we're going to start this month as all these new people take office.
Correct. Over the last couple of years, Pennsylvania was the only Republican legislative body in the entire Northeast through the Pennsylvania Senate. That's absolutely incredible. We now have a Republican governor. The House went pretty significantly over, I think beyond what people, to be honest, really thought that it would. And they now control the redistricting. Pennsylvania's going to lose one more congressional seat, as unfortunately has happened for just way too many decades. They're going to oversee that. And in reality, there's a big agenda that's out there. As Jim said, we've got huge fiscal problems.
And we'll get to
They're going to be charged with those. But there's also a lot of things that, in our view, need to be done. We're talking about Ed Rendell. Ed Rendell came in and did what he said he was going to do. He's going to spend money on education. He's going to spend money on a bunch of other things. We got a lot of debt, and now we're faced with that. He did what he said he was going to do,
and
now
the voter,
we're going to be faced with it.
And remember something else, Jim Redmond. Like it or not, Ed Rendell won 2 elections, and they were virtual landslides, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, these were not small elections, and he had a huge agenda, and for the first 4 years, I think he's the only governor in modern history that during the first 4 years had the other party in control of the legislature. And Republicans went along with that spending agenda for the first 4 years. Now, the attitude that we see coming into this new legislature is very different, isn't it?
Whole different circumstance in terms of, as I pointed out earlier, the fiscal situation. Far different than what Ed Rendell faced 8 years ago.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, Fred wants to make a point. We'll let him make a point. We're going to go on to maybe another couple of issues in the past before we get to the future. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. All right, Fred Anton wanted to make a point.
Well, I want to re-emphasize the dramatic change in the Pennsylvania House. 112 to 91. And more importantly, a dramatic new majority leader in Mike Turzai.
A frequent guest on the program.
And a man who has committed himself to a conservative agenda, and particularly the sale of the state liquor stores, and has the majority enough votes, even if there are some defections, to get a program through.
You make a good point. This largest majority, I think, for any party in the state house since the 1950s. Now, we'll come back to Jim on this, but we'll let you weigh in first. Health care, the huge impact of the health care bill passed, what, last March?
Correct.
March of '09. It will work its way through Pennsylvania. What's the impact on the business community?
Well, it's huge. The impact on business community as well as hospitals is significant. First off, there's lots of new mandates, taxes. It's going to change the way that health care and health insurance is provided in many ways. And as you look at this, it also creates a lot of very interesting constitutional issues that are now playing their role out in a lot of state courts and a lot of federal courts in terms of what is the role, what can the federal government really do, what's the role of state government. It's going to radically change health care for a number of years, and despite the talk about we're going to come in and pull it back, it's not going to be revoked as long as President Obama sits in the White House.
All right, the fiscal situation of the state. You want to weigh in on that, or do you want to?
Well, I think we need to. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the Affordable Care Act was intended to reduce the number of uninsured individuals, change the insurance system, eliminate pre-existing conditions, increase eligibility for
kids
dependent
can stay
children,
on the health care, young folks like that.
Over a 10-year period, reduce the total cost of government outlays for health care expenditures. Remains to be seen as to whether or not those two main objectives can be achieved. But there are important aspects of the way in which we deliver health care and certainly the way in which we finance health care.
And the mandate portion of it mandated everybody buy insurance or pay a tax. They don't call it a tax, but I guess that's what we'll find out if it is or not. Has been struck down by a federal court in Virginia, and we'll see where that all goes. Would you all agree, if the mandate gets struck down, they can't pay for the rest of it? How does it survive? Can it survive a ruling by the Supreme Court that the mandate is...
I don't see how you do that. I don't see how this thing works without the individual mandate.
Fred agrees. You agree. You're the expert on health care.
It presents some enormous problems in terms of
how you pay.
If you eliminate pre-existing conditions, people only buy insurance when they get sick.
All right, I want to jump to fiscal. Man, this state, we're not New Jersey, we're not New York, we're not Illinois, we're not California, but we have a debt. Talk about it.
Well, if you look at tax revenues, they're in the neighborhood of $25 million. The budget that we're currently in spends $28 billion. Right. The difference is made up with federal stimulus monies that expire next year.
They go away.
They go away.
Plus, we have 3 or 4 other enormous problems. There's a hole in the transportation side of the budget that some say $400 or $500 million a year. There's
unemployment compensation, $3 billion debt.
Yep.
Pensions.
The fix will help temporarily, but it slides the debt off into the future. So, Fred Anton, Tom Corbett coming in, we're going to get to that in the next segment in greater detail. The fiscal picture of the state is his biggest problem, yes or no?
It is his biggest problem, and I hear the shortfall described as approximately $6 billion.
$6 billion.
5 to 6, and I read something recently that said over the last 2 years, the federal government has pumped in $12 billion. So that's $6 billion a year. And this is a cliff. You're going over a cliff because $6 billion is tremendous cutbacks to various programs. Now, a lot of this stuff also is mandated, particularly a lot of the welfare and so forth is mandated.
Medicaid program.
And how much can you cut back education?
So there's 3 items that drive the budget. We'll talk a little bit more about some other things. I want to ask you guys follow the legislature, whether there's ready to reform the legislature. Corbett is going to go in that direction. But education, Medicaid spending, you know this more than anybody else, and prisons are, what, 70%, 65? 80, you're telling me 80. So what's left? What's left, Gene Barr? Where do you play around
So
with?
if you don't get into some of those things, and I think that clearly the welfare side is one of the real targets you've got to look at here, I don't know how you make any significant cuts, and I believe the welfare side will see some pretty significant cuts.
And there's some optional programs in Medicaid that I won't call them add-ons, but the state doesn't have to provide them. Is that correct?
That's correct, but the cost of those small changes relate to the mandatory.
All right, what's ahead? That's the year in review. What's ahead? We're going to take, Tom Corbett comes in, as these gentlemen point out, with huge challenges. We'll take a look at those following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back. Well, we've done the year in past. The year in review, I guess, is the best way to say that. We're looking ahead to 2011 with our panel of experts. All right, let's talk a little bit about Tom Corbett. Fred, I'll start with you. Fiscal challenges. What other challenges does this guy face?
Well, he has a challenge of administering a huge bureaucracy. He's off to a very slow start. His named chief of staff, Brian Nutt, decided to go into the private sector. and who's going to be the chief of staff, and who's going to be the cadre of insiders who are going to oversee a huge bureaucracy. Putting this in place is a special challenge that only exists at the beginning. Otherwise, you're just changing one person.
Okay, so we have the budget, we have the just literally getting your handle on the bureaucracy with top advisors. That's point number 2. You have a third one you can throw in there?
Well, you know, I think that that's part of it is kind of making that baton handoff. I think he's got to look at that first when you look at what the transition teams have been working on. Is making sure, as Fred said, that government's going to work. And then it's starting to look at what policy changes this administration wants to make. And clearly, if you ask us, we'll give you a number of them. They include legal reform, business tax structure, labor regulation changes. Those things need to be looked at as quickly as possible after the transition's done.
Truth in advertising here. Some of you are on this transition team, right? Are you on it, Fred?
I am not.
You are. You're on it, and you're on it. Okay.
Yes.
Just so everybody knows, nothing wrong with that. You're giving advice. That's
Absolutely.
what, you know, it's important. All right, Jim, you're up on that hill. The hill, as we call it, you know, it's called. That has a little inside meaning. The hill meaning the capital. He wants to reform the legislature. He wants to get rid of these per diems. This is just whatever it is, 150 some bucks a day that lawmakers get. There's some other things that he wants to do with cars. Whatever, how many, 6,000 or whatever. No, they're more than that. Whatever the number is in a V.
I don't hear much of that, Terry. Certainly in the first 6 months, I hear that the big 3 issues are getting a budget done on time, which we haven't had in the last 8 years.
That's right.
2, doing the legal reforms that Gene mentioned, and 3, selling the state liquor stores. Just getting those 3 done in the first 6 months will be monumental.
Yeah, but he's going to present a reform package the first week in office. Now, you folks have been around this a long time. You know how hard. He's going to head the executive branch, Fred, not the legislative branch. He's going to want, he being Tom Corbett, is going to want the legislature to make a lot of changes. How much pressure can he put on them to change the way they function?
Well, I don't think he can put too much pressure on them because he's going to need their cooperation to enact a budget and to enact some reforms that don't have anything to do with the operation of the legislature.
Right.
So I don't think he's going to do well by putting too much direct pressure on them for something like smaller.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point because let's go back to what we said before about Ed Rendell. How Ed Rendell got a lot of what he wanted is, hey, look, I'll give you this in your district, I'll do that in your district. There's no money to give out.
Yep.
So we're now down to having a lot of discussion about what makes sense for Pennsylvania, which, let's be honest, is probably the way that it ought to be. The per diem issue, to go back to one of the things, you ask someone on the street, should you be able to give expenses and have to give expenses? Of course they would. It makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right, we're going to break. Final thoughts coming up, 2011. It looks like a big year in Pennsylvania government and politics, and we'll be here to cover it for you. We're back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Okay, welcome back. Well, looking ahead 2011, Jim Redmond, is the tort reform, liability reform has been a big issue for the business community and for hospitals and physicians and others. Where do you think that stands in the new? What's the possibility of change there?
I think it's high on the priority, and I think the first thing that the legislature will deal with is joint and several liability reform.
You got to explain that to some of us. For dummies, you know, go ahead. What does that mean?
Well, in cases where there are multiple defendants and one or more of the defendants can't pay, the other become liable. So you could be found 10% liable, but in the end pay 100% of the award.
It's called deep pockets. Is that right?
Exactly.
See, that's why we have these guys on. They make a okay. Your big item for what?
Well, you know, right along with the same, joint and several was passed twice already. It was struck down, one on a court procedure, one Governor Rendell vetoed it. And again, I think it's important to point out, this is not just one, hey, gee, let's do legal reform. This actually would deliver money back to Pennsylvania. Talk to the people at PennDOT. PennDOT is regularly sued for no real good reason up to the limits of their coverage. This will actually bring more money back to the state by eliminating some of those unnecessary lawsuits.
All right, let's go to look.
This will not be easy. This will not be easy. It
trial
will be
lawyers
very,
and
very difficult
Yeah.
because there's a great deal of sympathy for the trial lawyers in the Republican state Senate.
Okay.
And any reform, amendments will be offered and they may well pass. So you may have some, quote, tort reform or lawsuit abuse reform that doesn't amount to anything.
I got it. Good. That's a good point. All right. Before we get out of here, look, if the budget is cut, and the new governor said 10% across the board, we don't quite know what that means. It could be administratively, could be programmatic, but programs matter to people. Is this going to be, Gene Barr, a contentious spring in the state capitol?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about getting this budget out of the way quickly. The thought is you're not going to have any money to spend. We know we're going to have to make tough cuts. Let's make them and go. I think you're going to have a lot of contentious cuts, maybe behind the scenes. There certainly will be a lot of people angling to protect, but given what Tom Corbett has said, no new taxes, you've really got no choice but to cut.
You guys going to wade through demonstrators? I mean, in the past, you know, this Capitol has been filled with demonstrators, and
I think you're going to see that and more.
You know what's fun? What's
the
interesting?
union contracts are to be renegotiated June 30th, and those union workers are not going to take cuts.
Okay.
And you're going to have chaos if you try and make substantial cuts.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, no one knows for sure. I mean, the governor-elect has been vague, and politically, that's probably the wisest thing to do. I think we would all agree. Then get into what you're going to cut before he gets in to get these assessments. But are we talking about a little pain for state government or real pain?
Real pain.
Real pain.
Oh, I think it's real for a lot of places out there.
And also the pension situation. The pension situation and employees contributing to their health care.
Yep.
This is something that will hit every employee. If they don't have defined benefit plans, this is a big change in their economic situation.
All right, we have about 30 seconds left. I'm going to go very quickly, yes or no. Budget done on time. State budget done on time?
Yes.
State budget done? State budget done on time? All right, great panel. There we go. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well. And you stay here.